Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I'm Joe Chappelle, and you're listening to episode 37 of the OBGYN podcast. Today is the monthly checkup for July 2018. And with me today, I have Jerry Ballas from UC San Diego.
Hello.
And Julie Lian from Stony Brook. Good to have you back.
Glad to be back.
So before we get into today's discussion, I do want to mention our community Slack channel. For those who don't know, Slack is a communication device. It's an app you can get on your iPhone, your Android, or on your computer. And it just gives a way to basically interact with a group of people. And I have a community set up for people who listen to this podcast. And it's been doing well. We have 20 plus people who are in it. And, you know, it's a lot of medical students and residents and some people from all over the world. So it's a nice resource for all of us. Before, I used to have it set up that you had to send me an email and then I send you an invitation. Well, I'm getting rid of that today. And if you go into the show notes for this episode, or you go to obgynfm.fm, you will get a link, and you can sign up by yourself. You don't need me anymore. I don't need to be in the middle. So I really think it is a great place for us to talk about medicine, OBGYN, or just our life as an OBGYN, and it's a great resource. So I encourage you all to take advantage of it, go there, sign up, and it's really for you guys to make it what you want it to be. So enough about that. So today we have 2, maybe 3 topics to go through. I think they're a little interesting, a little different than the last time. Last time was very focused on basic research, and today we're going the opposite direction. So we're going to start actually with social research. And the first paper we're going to talk about today is Ethological Observations of Social Behavior in the Operating Room. And this was from Laura Jones et al., and it's from Emory University, as their, medical campus there. And also, interestingly, from the Yerkes National Primate Research Center at Emory. And that primate research is the interesting part, because they took research techniques that they use for primates, and they went into operating rooms and they used that research methodology on humans to see how we interact in the operating rooms. And before we even get into it, I think that was a fascinating. I'm thinking of where that idea came from. Like, who had the idea to use this primate research in the OR? Brilliant.
I don't know. I think if you look at an operating room from a layman's perspective, it looks a lot like the old-fashioned primate videos you'd see of experiments back in the 50s and 60s. So I could see the logical jump. Why not?
Yeah, it's sort of like organized chaos at some points, and I guess they wanted to use their techniques for evaluating social interaction in the animal kingdom and apply it to the operating room.
Yeah, and I guess like primate culture, it's the operating room of all places is very hierarchical, where there's one person really in charge, or we think we're in charge, and then a lot of people underneath at various layers. So perhaps it kind of mimics that clan, tribal community you see in primates. But there still had to be someone who was in an operating room one day who said to themselves, maybe we can do primate research in here. So anyway.
Probably with orthopedics.
Well, we're gonna get into them. So they have there's a great distinction here about orthopedics that I found fascinating, but we'll get there. So what they did is they looked at social interactions and they characterized them as either cooperative for the surgery, conflict, or neither. And they did that for 23 cases, and they observed 200 communications across those. 59% of the interactions were deemed to be cooperative, and only 2.8% were deemed to be conflict, which, I'll be honest, I've been in ORs where I feel like the ratios there are a lot different. But good for them at Emory. And then 38% were classified as neither. So like I said, at 2.8%, I mean, you could be in a OR with one of our oncologists from when we trained, Jerry, and I feel like it was a lot higher than 2.8%.
Yeah, I mean, I did feel like that was a little low, but I mean, we've evolved as a species, I'd like to think. One question I kind of had, they didn't go too deeply into the credentials of the observers. I think they talked about some training, but not like what level of the observers. Basically, what was the skill set of the observers to kind of pick up on nuances and pick up on what was actually being said, or, what was going on, whether it was just picking up kind of superficial interactions, emotions, laughter that others would have maybe picked up as, well, that was more sarcasm than actual, jokes that were mutual.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, there definitely are subtleties in the operating room that maybe someone who doesn't operate wouldn't know? That is a very good question, though, about how they were trained to use this methodology. What do you think about the different percentages, Julie?
I was surprised, too, by the lower percentage in the 2.9%. But I guess, in our more recent environment where I feel like compared to when I was a medical student, sort of bad behavior in the operating room isn't as tolerated anymore by, the hospital administration, the nurses, and, especially residents. So especially since, we wanted to make it a safe and non-bullying environment. So I guess in the more recent culture, it's not that surprising.
Right. And Joe, you brought up specifically, and we could easily look back and over my 4 years of residency, easily pinpoint GYN oncology as being the higher percentage of times where I could see conflict. But then when I take that in the context of all the other hundreds of surgeries, I can see how that percentage could be lower when you look at across a wider swath.
Fair enough. I think there's a lot going on there. I think Julie's absolutely right. I forget what they called it at Stony Brook, but probably about 6-7 years ago, there was zero tolerance for bad behavior in the operating room. And it took a couple surgical attendings to be reprimanded, and some of them pretty harshly. And it definitely had a dampening effect on that kind of behavior. So maybe we're just doing a better job policing ourselves, which is good.
Yeah.
So then they looked at some different factors that affected the level of cooperation and conflict. And they start looking at the attending surgeon first. And interestingly, they found that neither age nor gender mattered as far as more cooperation or more conflict. And I thought that was really surprising to me, that even across age especially, there was no difference. And then they looked at academic versus community, and I think, unsurprisingly to me, they found that academic attendings were more likely to teach, and they were counted as cooperative, so they had some more cooperative communication there because they were teaching. Interestingly, I think 78% of all the communications in the operating room were initiated by the attending or the resident, which I guess makes sense. And as far as cooperation, 54% was initiated by the attending, and 41% of the time, the resident or the fellow was the recipient of that. So about 50% of the time. And then for conflict, and this is where it got interesting, again, 67% of the conflict communication originated from the attending, but this time, instead of the resident getting 40% of the communication, the circulating nurse actually received the highest percentage at 26%, with the resident at 20%. And that was, from being in the OR a lot, and I know Dr. Lian, you're in the OR a lot too. I do see that I probably have the most conflict with the circulating nurse, and I was wondering what your thoughts about that.
Certainly, looking back on the instances where there's been conflict in the OR, it's been more so with the nursing staff, and I definitely try to keep my frustration to a minimum, at least visibly. But I think, when you're operating, let's say you're in a difficult situation and you're asking for different equipment and different things, and if the nursing staff isn't as prompt with it as you would like them to be, I think that's where some of the conflict can show up.
Yeah, and I actually would say that the conflict starts to happen with the variability of skill beyond the operating room table when you start getting into who's circulating, in terms of being able to ask for something and getting a consistent response across all people that are circulating can also be frustrating. So I think that's where sometimes a source of conflict can happen, is where you can see the expectations between attending and resident are somewhat equal because you kind of know what their skill set are. Scrub tech similarly, anesthesia similarly, but scrub nurses, there's not that kind of consistency in terms of knowledge of where things are, what things are, how fast things are, acuity of the surgery. That can actually vary significantly.
Right. It's usually change of shift at Stony Brook Hospital. It's 3 p.m. You're operating, let's say, and then there's a change of shift, and then inevitably you get a team of nurses that aren't familiar with gynecology. And so that's when, the anxiety in me comes out.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things they do talk about later in this paper is about turnover, staff turnover in the OR, where, if your whole staff turns over 3 or 4 times during your surgery, that really has an impact on how efficient your surgery is, and that can get really frustrating. And I know that one of the things that really, maybe it shouldn't bother me, and I try, like you said, Dr. Lian, I try to keep it inside, but when my circulating nurse just leaves the room, and I don't know where they're going, and then I need something, and I yell out to the room, like, I need this. And I turn around and there's no one there to listen to me. And then I have to wait for 5 minutes till they come back from wherever they were, and then I ask them to get it, so it just delays everything more. That always frustrates me.
Well, it's a situation beyond your control. And if there's one thing you do not want in the operating room under any circumstance, is something beyond your control, which I can see the cascading level of frustration and conflict going along that hierarchy of things not in a surgeon's control. An attending has more control over a resident, has some control over the scrub tech, but less control over the circulating nurse, less concern over anesthesiology. And so you see this almost inverse level of frustration and conflict that can occur with the increasing level of variability and lack of control.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's a great way of thinking about it, thinking about control. And when you lack that control to affect the change, then you get more anxious about it, and that leads to more frustration. That makes sense. I like that.
Yeah.
One of the things I found that was great was they found that cooperation as a percentage of the interactions decreased as the case went on longer. And in fact, they basically a 5% decrease odds for every 10 minutes the case went on. And, a lot of this paper, honestly, is telling us things that we already know, just from operating. But in some ways, it's not true until you write it down. And so It is nice that, someone did this and they wrote this down, and now we can, how we are, and Jerry and I can probably talk about this for a while, but, now that something's written down and it is fact. So now I can take this paper out and show it to my colleagues and say, well, look, it's been published, right? Which is a whole ridiculous other conversation. But yeah,
now,
it's nice
now
that
in the OR, I can sit there going, hey guys, it's been 10 minutes. Let's do something cooperative and buck the trend.
So anyway, we know as the cases go longer, we get more frustrated.
Because something isn't in our control anymore.
Right.
Exactly right. So then looking at conflict, I did that already. I apologize. So then looking at the department, they found that GYN had the highest level of cooperation at 66%, so go us.
Of course.
And that orthopedic had the least, there's ortho for you, Jerry, at 49%. And that for pretty much all of the specialties, there was an inverse relationship between cooperation and conflict. So if you had more cooperation, you had less conflict, except for orthopedics, which had the lowest cooperation and the lowest conflict somehow.
I mean, it's just, I just envision the opening scene to Space Odyssey of just the gorillas drumming and just I don't know. Maybe it's just, that's where the primate research idea came from, is just seeing a bunch of orthopods beating bones around the operating room. No offense to my orthopods friends, sorry.
I'm pretty sure they're not listening to this podcast. That's okay. So interestingly, GYN actually had the lowest at 0.9% of all communications that were conflict. And then cardiothoracic surgery was 4.5%. Which again is not too surprising. There was a great, I got to remember what the guy's name was, but he was a former president of the American College of Surgeons. He was a cardiothoracic surgeon, and he started his residency or fellowship in cardiothoracic surgery with Dr. DeBakey, and he lasted about 2 years, and he quit. And he quit because the environment was so toxic. There was always being told that he was terrible and he couldn't do anything right, and everyone's getting yelled at, and people were throwing things in the OR. And he, told Dr. DeBakey that he quit, and Dr. DeBakey said, "Well, you're never going to be a cardiothoracic surgeon." And so then this guy obviously went on and became a cardiothoracic surgeon, became a chair of a department, eventually became the president of the American College of Surgeons. And so when he was inducted into that, Dr. DeBakey was in the front row, and he made sure to look at him the entire time. But yeah, I mean, it can get certainly they're known for that kind of Well, it's, high risk surgery, right? So it's high risk surgery. There's a lot that can go wrong. One little microscopic thing, and that can be the make it or break it. So I could see how when there's more pressure for cooperation, there's more potential for conflict.
And those subspecialties still tend to be dominated by men.
We're getting there in a second.
There we go.
So last thing is gender composition. And I thought there were some interesting things on here. They basically found that if the attending surgeon gender, whatever that was the opposite of the predominant gender of the rest of the staff, that there was more cooperation and less conflict. And that if it was female attending and female OR staff, it was worse. And it was even worse than that if it was a male attending and male staff. But the more mixed in general, the better it was. And the last other thing they saw was, it's a figure 2 in this paper for the people who want to look at it, but it was the percentage of cooperation on one axis and the percentage of males in the OR on the other. And the lowest cooperation was when there was 100% men.
It's just amazing. It really is.
Which is probably why GYN had the highest rate, because we have more female residents, female attendings. I don't know. Are you guys surprised by that finding, or?
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, it goes, I think, when you get to a sociologic, physiologic, basic level, when we're talking control, when we're talking about high stakes and we're talking about pressure, women tend to have better responses to that. I'm not saying it's perfect, but on average, they have a much different, I think, reaction autonomic system than the male reaction to those kind of situations, especially when you get together a pack mentality, which is why a mixture is always the best way to go in most social situations.
What do you think, Dr. Lian?
I mean, I've been obviously in a room with all women. I've not been in a room with all men. But I personally, I prefer in the operating room when we have a mix of genders, because it's sometimes when you're in a room full of women, there's too much estrogen in the room. If that makes any sense. And I definitely see why there'd be more cooperation when there's a mixed gender. I can't speak for the all male team, though.
Well, according to this, all estrogen is better than all testosterone, so you still have it okay.
I guess we, as females, we may not get along, but at least on the outside, we'll show that we get along. Maybe.
Fair enough. So I don't know. So what do we take away from this paper? I mean, like I said, I think a lot of it is stuff we already knew, but it's nice to have it written down. But what can we take from this and apply to what we do on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I think being cognizant of how you interact in the operating room, stop mystifying it and make it some sort of, holy place of, manly men, and actually turn it into the kind of teaching classroom laboratory that it actually is, with a high-risk situation going on. But in the end, we're all in it together. So I think if you focus on teamwork, focus on the makeup of your team, work on technical things like turnover, avoid too many changes with the OR staff during a surgery, if at all possible, and increase the mix. I mean, make a conscious effort to increase the mix of people in your operating room. I think that's just a recipe for success in general when you talk academics, let alone something like the operating room.
Right. And I agree. I mean, in the end, everyone's there to help the patient, take care of the patient. And so it's important to treat everyone, ranging from the circulating nurse to the medical student to the resident and fellow, everyone with respect.
And I think it also speaks to preparation. Part of the thing, the emphasis now on timeouts, briefs, going into the operating room with a plan, knowing what you need, telling the circulating nurse, please have this available, this, and this at the beginning of cases. I mean, this goes beyond just typical primate behavior, but if you can actually plan for the worst, that goes into the whole idea of control and stress and the unknown, if you have all your ducks in a row. So that way, when the scrub circulating nurse signs out to the next one coming in, they can say, here's this, and this they might need, and it's right there in front of them.
Yeah, I was thinking about this for a while. Tom is one of our scrub techs in the main OR down here. He likes to be prepared. He hates the last minute trying to run around and get things. And he's been saying for a long time that he wants people to go down in the beginning of the day and say, these are my 3 cases, and paste on the wall, this is what I need for each case, which is nice, but no one does it. What would be really nice, I think, is having a computerized process to this where you look for your cases for the next day, you go and you look at them, and in there you can say, I need this, and this, and then the OR staff knows in the morning that's what you need. And if I could do that from my home at 9 o'clock at night, the night before, I would definitely do that. But you're absolutely right. Preparing and getting everything you need before you get to the OR, even before that day, the week before, totally helps to cut down on the conflict. And once actually, one of the things in the paper so that once the conflict started, it just got worse and worse. Like, it was hard to bring it back to cooperation after it started off so negative. So starting on the right foot I can't say any more that it's important, I guess. All right, so I think we killed that one. So everyone should be nicer to each other, and everyone's important, and we should all be prepared. So I think we got that. So we're actually going to switch gears from that a little bit and go to a paper that is about what I think is a surgeon behaving terribly. And we'll tell you why I think that. I think the two of you will agree. So this is an accepted manuscript. It's pre-published at the Journal for Minimally Invasive Gynecology, and it is called Laparoscopic Evacuation of an Early Pregnancy. It is by Kemal Azarkan, and they're from Turkey. And it is an abstract and then a video. So I'll put the link in. I don't think you can access this one, guys, unless you are you have access to the Journal of Minimally Invasive Gynecology, but I'll put it there anyway. But essentially, they had a woman who had a 12-week missed AB, and she also wanted a tubal. And so they somehow convinced her that they would do a laparoscopic evacuation of this 12-week missed abortion at the same time that they would do a bilateral salpingectomy. And I'm not really sure how they said they did a informed consent, which I find difficult to believe because the woman agreed to it. But essentially what they did is they put in their ports like they would for hysterectomy. They opened up the retroperitoneum. And again, if you look at the videos, if you have access, you can watch all this. They opened up the retroperitoneum on both sides. They put a clip on the uterine arteries at the uterine origin. Then they made a bladder flap so they could get to the lower segment. And then they basically made a classical incision vertically from the lower uterine segment all the way up to the fundus. They delivered the gestational sac out of the uterus, put it in an endocatch bag, took it out, sutured the uterus, and then did a salpingectomy. And so what I am bringing this to you guys is a couple things. Is what would possess someone to do this? What did they think they were accomplishing? And why would the journal accept this as a case report to be published? I don't know. We'll start with Dr. Lian because she's our resident mid-invasive surgeon here.
Honestly, I'm not sure why they thought they should do this. It's one of those things that immediately popped up into my head as I was reading the abstract and watching the video was just because you can doesn't mean you should. It was almost like when they were dissecting out the retroperitoneum and finding the uterine arteries at the origin, they were just showing off that, look what we can do. And, I know they're trying to also educate the viewers and the readers about, how to do this more advanced surgery. But, at the end of the day, this patient, she didn't need this. And by doing this, they put the patient at great risk. So, also initially I thought, were they doing this surgery for a cesarean scar pregnancy? But looking at the video and their abstract, they were not. It was a straightforward 12-week missed abortion. So I was actually very upset and horrified to see this.
Yeah, I have no idea. And this is not because I don't do much laparoscopic surgery anymore. But this just boggled my mind. This line in the main results part, in situs of the operation, there was a 12th week pregnancy filling the pouch of Douglas.
It's just wrong.
I'm just confused. So, yeah, I went over this over and over again. And I thought maybe you just send me a broken link, and I'm like, where's the rest of the interesting part? Because I mean, there's some great work out there right now with minimally invasive approaches to cesarean scar ectopics, which I think is getting more and more um, widely used in order to save somebody from kind of a morbid procedure. But this literally just sounds like they were practicing how to do hysterotomies with monopolar cautery for no reason. Were they avoiding the vagina? Is that maybe, like, is there something unspoken here that maybe the patient preferred not to have anything performed vaginally? Like,
They don't say that.
They don't say that, right? So did she have?
So.
I know. Was there like,
You're being very generous.
I am. Maybe an obliterated cervix that they just could. There was no way they were going to dilate.
I mean, the travesty is also she's had 4 vaginal deliveries.
Oh, I just don't know what happened here. This is actually a mystery. Are there no letters to the editor about this, or is it just getting, it's in press now?
Yet. Yeah,
we should draft something.
I mean, I'm sure we won't be the only people who are talking about this. So, but to me, it harkens back to the dark ages of medicine, where men would just do things to women because they could, because they were the doctor. Like, this had no medical benefit to the patient. There was no even there's not even a research benefit to this. It's not even something you can say, oh, this is for the greater good. It's just like men playing.
Was anyone out there thinking, how else could I remove a missed abortion from inside the uterus? What other methods could possibly be out there? Let me think about it.
And how can I challenge myself to do this?
Right. Did they leave their initials too? I'm just curious. Maybe they branded the uterus at the same time?
I feel like that would have been the next step here. So, I think all 3 of us, and probably the entire listening body here to this episode, will agree that what they did was unethical, unless there's more information that we don't know about, but it's certainly not in the abstract. So you would think if they had some reason, they would have put it there. But what boggles me even more is that this was accepted at a journal. Like, the things that we're talking about should have been raised by them, and they should have said, you know what, this is unethical. We're not going to condone this by publishing it. So I'm not really sure what was possessing the editors of this journal to accept this for publication. That actually is more upsetting to me.
Right. Now, I agree too. I mean, JMIG is an international journal. It's well respected, and I was very surprised to see it published.
I don't know. Maybe it was a 42-week pregnancy, and they just did the first ever laparoscopic delivery of a baby.
Well, I watched the video, and I can tell you that it's a 12-week gestational sac.
I just don't
and
get it.
It is not it's filling the pouch of Douglas. I can also tell you that.
Yeah,
it is
something is lost in translation.
We can hope so.
Man.
So they do say that this is a before print unedited manuscript, and that it will undergo copy editing, typesetting, and review of the resulting proof before it's published in the final form. And so there may be some changes to it before it's published. So we can only hope that if there's more information, we get that before it actually goes into print.
We will also be building a time machine, going back in time and stopping these folks from doing it. I don't know what else you could typesetting. I don't think that's going to fix this.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Lady.
I know. That's, again, at the end of the day, we are all here to help people be better, to become better. We're here to help them through a difficult process, whatever it may be. And in here, it was a complete violation of the just
do no harm.
Do no harm. Exactly. It's upsetting. We will keep you, dear listeners, informed if we hear more about this, and I think that Dr. Ballas is already typing a letter to the editor.
I may or may not be writing something up here.
Sometimes he gets a little inflamed, so this may be it. And if he's in the OR, it leads to conflict. So we're bringing it all full circle here.
I'm a saint. You know what? I'm not probably the last time I've been going back to OR conflict. I'm a very big proponent of skin to skin. Postpartum skin to skin, both in vaginal deliveries and cesarean deliveries. I make it known from very early on, at the beginning of the case, for all the circulating nurse and the delivery nurses to know that the patient is more than welcome to have the baby on the breast, on the chest while we're operating. It doesn't impinge. And it's really amazing to see the variability in nurses that comply or don't think that that's possible. And when I have to really, really advocate for that, that's when I've been told I've been disruptive and or threatening in the operating room. Fascinating stuff.
No, I mean, that's a difficult situation where you're really trying to advocate for whatever it may be, but for someone's what you think best interest, and you get pushback, and it does get really upsetting, and it can be hard to handle that in a constructive way when all you're really getting is stonewalled from somebody else. That's hard.
And the only tool you have is the modulation of your voice. I'm scrubbed in. There's nothing else that I could physically do to emphasize what I'm asking for than different tones of voice or different ways of saying it, or basically badgering. If you have to ask something multiple times, it sounds like you're badgering.
Because you are.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, well, I don't know. That's one of those things where what gets you the long-term outcome, and that can be difficult in the moment to realize that or to control that sometimes. But sometimes the right thing to do, especially with a patient who's awake, is to let that go and then talk to everyone afterwards. And again, try to bring them in. Why are you doing what you're doing? Why is that important? Why is it best for the patient? This should be something that you want to do. You should want to participate in this because it's best for what we do as taking care of pregnant women. But at the time, you're just frustrated and you want someone to just do what is best. So that's always hard. That's like team building, and then you're getting into a whole different segment of things that we are never taught in medical school.
No.
So actually, that leads me, that's a nice segue, Jerry, thank you, into our last topic. And that is something that's actually going to make Jerry angrier, I think.
Making me sound like the Hulk.
Well, I know what buttons to push, and I pushed a few of them tonight. So this last one is the United Nations, WHO, was in Geneva, and there's a resolution about basically just saying that breastfeeding is best, and that all the countries in the world should strive to encourage that and limit inaccurate and misleading marketing about formula, or they call it breast milk substitutes, which I liked. I don't know what you call that except for formula, but. And the Americans had been on board with this for a while, and then at the last minute, they torpedoed the whole resolution, basically because they wanted to protect the formula makers in the United States, which was a paper that came out of article that came out a couple of days after the initial one, and that's the reason they did that. And this is just upsetting to me on a number of levels. We've started to make progress finally in the United States over the last 10 years about really helping women advocate for breastfeeding, doing skin-to-skin in the OR. That's a good thing. And now, at the last minute, the United States, which should be a leader in the world, comes in and for really just capitalistic reasons torpedoes this, and that was just very upsetting to me.
So I want to preface everything I say with this. There are women who are not able to breastfeed. We know that. There's reasons, biologic, social. There are true barriers for some women to breastfeeding, where the advent of formula or milk substitutes, or even banked milk that needs to be given by bottle, have all been lifesavers to both mom and baby. That goes without saying. And that's not who this is about. Unfortunately, that's what the formula makers wanted to try to twist the conversation to make it about. They wanted to make it seem like we were causing undue harm on a vast majority of women by taking away their choice to breastfeed or not. And that's where this goes off the rails in terms of slapping the face of common sense, research, biology, the vast majority of human population for this capitalistic gain. And that's all that this is. No baby is going to ever go hungry on this planet from a woman who has a biologic reason that they can't breastfeed, whether it be some sort of underlying pathology, surgical reason, or just bad biology. We've gotten to that point in society in most parts of the world where that's just not going to happen. The problem they're seeing is that the $70 billion industry is no longer the $120 billion industry it used to be, or $200 billion industry that it used to be, by basically funneling formula into hospitals since the 50s. And the reasons we went against this, the reasons that were put out there about third world countries not being able to feed their children is the precise opposite of why it's important to encourage breastfeeding, because that by far, without any kind of conflict in the literature or any kind of conflict in history, shows it is the most reliable and economic way to feed the vast majority of children in this world, not formula. And so to kind of gaslight us that way and try to frame it in that regard, because they figure typical Americans will think, oh, third world countries need to be, fed by, modern day America. They figure they can get away with that. And sadly, honestly, with the 40% that support this administration, they're probably nodding in their heads going, yeah, of course they need formula in third world countries. How else are they going to make milk? It's absolutely catastrophic, in my opinion. Sorry.
Rant over.
What do
you think, Dr. Lian?
I was surprised when I first saw the headlines, and I thought about, what's going on currently, and I thought, not surprising. But I completely agree with both of you that, in third world countries, people can't afford the formula. And the fact that the U.S. is trying to say that the formula may be better than breast is crazy. And actually, in third world countries, because of the advertisements and the sort of the promotions that they do for formulas, some people think that formulas are more prestigious.
It's a status.
And yes, a status thing.
And that we're not innocent to this. I mean, the medical community has a huge role to play in this problem from half a century ago, when you had doctors out there promoting it, saying it's better, it's safer. And you brought up the class part. I mean, that was my own parents. That was my own mom. Immigrant mothers that came to this country. Right. They were fed the line that only poor women from the old country breastfed, but rich American women of status and symbol, right, they bottle fed. You don't use your, the breast milk for that. You're not poor. And so it's just this complete flip of the message for pure profit. And that's it.
I mean, that whole thing goes back even the 1870s in France. If you were above a certain status, you didn't breastfeed your own children. You had a wet nurse for that. Like you didn't breastfeed your own children. That was weird, right? So we've been doing this battle for 100, 150 years. But you're absolutely right, Jerry. And the flip of that. Now we have women who feel guilty and anxiety when they can't breastfeed. And so, we need to work on how we market the other way as well.
Well, we need infrastructure. I mean, if we're going to promote breastfeeding, well, we better be ready to promote lactation consultants. We better be able to promote midwifery care in the postpartum period, because they by far have shown best rates of breastfeeding amongst their parents or amongst their patients, because they talk about it prenatally. MDs are notoriously bad at bringing up that subject for some reason. I guess we think more in the moment leading up to delivery, but you need to set up a woman's expectations even before delivery about breastfeeding, their options, the potential roller coaster they may go through, because for some women it hits them like a ton of bricks postpartum how not easy it is. Despite all the positive messaging we put out there, we rarely show the women that have problems. And you're right, we need to flip that message and show it's just like anything else. You're going to have to put some work into it. We're going to have to give you the support for it. But ultimately, by and large, the vast majority of women can produce enough milk through the critical period of breastfeeding time to get their kid through a vital part.
So you think if we took some of the $70 billion from the formula industry and put it towards lactation consultants and home visits,
education,
education, that would be better?
Absolutely, without a doubt. Crazy people. I mean,
well, that's
it's just
logical.
It's just insane. It's just absolutely insane to me. And this is why I could never go into politics, because I don't have that ability to at least see certain issues from the other side by any means. That there's 40% of people out there that can look at this and say that we're right. It makes zero sense to me.
Well, it all depends where the formula is made. If your father and your grandfather work in the formula factory, you want them to stay in business. I'm being a little bit cute there, but
right. Well, no, and honestly, most people can identify probably where those formulas are, or who makes them, or how many. These plants are so automated at this point. They're not a huge employer of anybody in this country, but it's ideology. That's all people are basing their ideas on. It's choice, it's free market, it's capitalism, and the second they hear anything socialized, quote unquote, in terms of a message to women, well then, by God, we're all going to become socialized, automatons. It's crazy.
See, guys, I told you I know which buttons to press.
Oh boy, you got me on a good day.
So before we delve too much further into politics and endanger ourselves, so I thought we had some pretty interesting topics tonight. Are there any closing statements you guys have about any of the three topics that we discussed tonight?
I think I'd be interested to see if there are other letters or statements to JMIG about that article and what they'll do about that publication.
Yeah, well, we'll follow up on that, and if we have something to say, I'll make sure to have you back on, Dr. Lian, to discuss the inevitable fallout from that video abstract.
I'd like to say, in general, from medicine to surgical techniques to society in general, the involvement and the elevation of women and girls that is progressing over the last 50 years is only going to lead to greater advancement and improvements in our world, from operating room cooperation to, my guess, women not cutting other women's uteruses open to remove 12-week fetuses laparoscopically, to promoting and supporting each other in terms of breastfeeding, and if you can't breastfeed, supplementing with formula in a logical way. So, go women.
There you go, then. So there was a undercurrent through the entire thing, and it just happened to be women.
I'd say that's life in general.
Well, fair, isn't that true? All right, well, Dr. Ballas, thank you very much for being on tonight.
Thank you for putting up with me.
And Dr. Lian, thank you very much for coming back. I'm glad we didn't scare you away last time.
Thank you for having me again.
All right, and that's it for tonight.
We may have done it this time, though. Sorry.
That's it for us tonight. I'll be back next week, I think, with an interview episode from a colleague of mine, which I think you guys find interesting, about aneuploidy. And then pretty soon, aneuploidy part 2 should be out, so you guys look forward to that. And until then, thank you all for listening.